Let me start today's program with a story about my guest. As a kid, my guest lived in a very poor neighborhood in New York. His dad cleaned floors in a New York building, and he took this kid to his work so that he could show what he was doing at work. And he tried to instill the value of education into this kid's mind. He told him that if you don't get proper education, that's what you're going to be doing all your life. The son understood, became a lawyer, a judge, and then a successful congressman. Hello, I'm Faz Rahman, and you're watching Cafe DC. Congressman, you represent a very diverse district in New York, Pakistanis, Indians, Bangladeshis. Do you see this as a challenge or as an opportunity?
An opportunity. When I look at my district, and as you've indicated, people who come from South Asia and other parts of the world, it's what makes America great. It's the opportunity of understanding other religions, other cultures, and I think it's what makes America great. I know it's what makes my district great. So it's definitely an opportunity to expand one's knowledge and understanding of how the world works.
And especially when you're on the Foreign Relations Committee in the House, so that makes your job a little easier, I guess, because you understand through your constituents the issues outside this country better, I suppose.
Well, yeah, it definitely helps when you sit down and you talk to individuals in my constituency, and they're telling you about their native land, their native land, and what's going on there and their perspective. So it gives me a perspective when I come back and I'm working on the Foreign Affairs Committee. But my district, like all of Queens County, which is the most diverse county in the United States of America, you know, I think that when I talk to my colleagues who are from there, we're able to come with a different perspective here on the House and be able to talk based upon facts on the ground from talking to individuals who've actually lived there, and that then encourage us to travel there so that we can see for ourselves. Because there's one thing about theory, there's another thing about being on the ground and seeing for yourself, getting a feel for the country, getting a feel for the people. And my district helps me do that when I travel.
This is your seventh full term in Congress, and since 1998, you've been winning with quite a margin. You know, again and again. What makes it so, like, you know, dramatic, these victories and, you know, these winnings over and over again? Is it because you have, of course, you have good support from your constituency, but what's the secret?
Number one, you never take anything for granted. You know, when you are a member of the United States House of Representatives, you run every 2 years. And so I have some constituents that say, hey, you know, you're always running. And the truth is, you are. So you never stop. But running means that you're trying to deliver services to the people. You're trying to make sure that your district office is open so folks who need help with the federal government, to make it easier for them, that they're there to get that help. And we do that on a consistent basis. You can come to our district office and you will always see people from the district there asking for help and receiving help. It also is important to have a voice and to do with your job here in Washington, D.C. And so I like to believe that it is the hard work and staying connected with my district, talking to my people, the people in the district, understanding what their needs and wants are. You know, and with that, of course, you know, the first thing that comes to you, you think that everybody's going to like what you do. I understand that sometimes people are not going to agree with you. But what you can do, even with them, is to explain to them why you do what you do. And I think that then you earn their respect, even if they disagree with you, as long as you explain it to them and let them know that you're doing it because in your view and from the knowledge that you've gained, it's the right thing to do.
And I think another key is engaging with your constituency and actually people outside your constituency. The reason this interview materialized is because you and I are friends on the Facebook. I sent you a message, you replied right back, and here we are talking to you. So engagement is, of course, one of the important factors that you practice.
Absolutely. Communication and talking to people. That's what makes the world go round. That's what makes America, America. And so the more people that you can touch with, that they can touch you and you can, you know, reciprocate and you touch them, the better it is. And so in today's world of the social media, whether it's on Facebook, or you can follow me on Twitter, or we can make sure that we touch bases through email, on the internet. We want to make sure that we're touching and hearing from folks, because in essence, when you're a member of Congress, your job is twofold. I represent the district that's elected me, but I also represent the United States of America. And so you need to hear from voices around the country, and thereby, because America doesn't live in a vacuum, people from around the world, because we have to interface with other countries, and we've got to make sure of what kind of relationships we have with them so that we can grow and prosper together. We all share one place, this place called Earth.
Congressman, you're on various caucuses in U.S. Congress, caucus on Pakistan, caucus on India, I suppose also Bangladeshi caucus. Yes. So, I mean, these countries, they also have some competing interests, especially India and Pakistan. So how do you balance these, competing interests, being on two different caucuses at the same time?
Well, number one, they are all important to the United States. As I said, I'm here as a representative of the United States. India, for example, is one of the largest democracies in the world. They've been very friendly to the United States. We've worked, there's a number of things that we've got to do with. Pakistan is very important to the United States. We've worked very closely together, especially after 9/11. They've reached out and we've done some things. So it's important, and it's important for us to try to get thereby get the Indians and Pakistanis together also, so that we can figure out there's a working relationship there. So I look at myself and look at the district as an opportunity to at least debate and talk and try to figure out how we can get more harmonization between the two countries, thereby, because if there's harmonization there, it makes it easier for those neighbors around it, but it makes it easier for those allies of those countries also to work together. And we're all really kind of entangled with one another, and we've got to figure out how to do it better.
You have represented the United States around the world to different countries. You've been to Pakistan, India. Can you share some of your experiences in Pakistan when you went there a while ago?
Well, you know what? It's eye-opening for me, because what you find most places that I go, that when you talk to individuals on the streets, when you get away from government, when you get away from even big business at times, because a lot of times when I travel, I like to just walk and stop somebody on the street and talk to them to find out, what their thoughts are and what they want out of life. And you find on the basic needs that everybody wants the same thing. They want their children to grow up in a peaceful world. They want an opportunity so that they can live a better life than they did. They want to make sure they have access to the internet and to jobs and to a better life. And so that's what I bring back, because the human part of everyone is what came out to me at Pakistan. People, culture's different, religion may be different, but at the heart of it, we are the same, and I come out of that. And so that tells me, when I walked out of the street, what you might hear in the news media when they pick up an individual who might be an extremist or something of that nature, because we have extremists in every culture. But those are by far the minority. The overwhelming number of individuals are like any other human being and want the same things that every human being wants. And that's what I got from Pakistan, not just the things that you talk about that happens every now and then, but that the people on the street, the people that are working every day, they just want a better life.
Huge changes are going to take place in the region, especially in South Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan. Americans are withdrawing next year. Pakistanis are having elections. There have been a lot of changes actually lately, and also will take a few more important changes. They're going to cut a very important corner this year and next year. Are you keeping an eye on those affairs, and what you think is going to happen after the Americans leave Afghanistan?
Well, you can't help but keep an eye, because we're all, as I said, the world is a smaller place. We're hopeful that the people in Pakistan and the people in Afghanistan will stand up and they will elect the leaders of their choice. That's what democracy is all about. People having their voices, people determining their leadership. And you would hope that as they do that, there'll be individuals who understand and want to make a better Pakistan or a better India, and thereby, and I think that better for each is if it's a peaceful India and a peaceful Pakistan working closely together. That makes it better for the majority of the whole. But it's up to the people to decide their leadership. And so all I can do from the United States, as we do here, is to hope that there's free and fair elections, and in individuals, human rights are respected, and thereby environmental rights are respected. And if that happens, then we are living in a better place.
Lately, the relations between Afghanistan and the United States been on the low point, especially after President Karzai made some statements regarding the American involvement with the Taliban. And Afghanistan also gets a lot of aid support from this country. What do you think is going on in that country, and especially through President Karzai's mind, when he makes these statements and alleges the Americans of colluding with the Taliban?
Afghanistan is a country in transition. It's a new democracy, and its leaders are going to make statements that they make. Our leaders will make statements that we make. We have Afghanistan, I believe, is in a better place than it was before we went into Afghanistan. But now it's time for us to leave. And I think that that's the message that President Karzai has given. It's time for the American troops to leave. Most Americans believe it's time for American troops to leave and allow the people of Afghanistan to stand on their own, to elect their own, etc. I think that's why one of the reasons why President Obama, when he was elected, he said that by 2014, we will have all of our troops out of Afghanistan. And that's what's taking place. So it's a process that is taking place, a natural process. And of course, some people want to play it up, some people want to play it down for their own purposes. But the process is a naturally moving forward. And so we would hope that this new democracy that is starting to bulge up, and there's going to be problems. Democracies are not perfect. It took America a long time, over 200 years, in fact, to get to a point where you could elect a Barack Obama as president. So we know, and people have to understand, democracies take time.
Congressman Meeks has been involved with Latin American politics for a long time. Especially, he met the late President Chavez many times. He represented the United States at his funeral. Let's watch a report on Venezuelan politics after Chavez.
A commanding and charismatic figure in life, Mr. Chavez played an outsized role on the world stage, largely by challenging the United States and what he saw as Washington's economic and political dominance of Latin America. Michael Shifter is head of the Inter-American Dialogue in Washington.
He is a guy about power. I think you can't really understand Chavez, the way he operated, what he did, what he couldn't do, unless you understand his tremendous appetite for power. And that meant power within Venezuela, power within Latin America, and that meant challenging and defying the superpower.
He repeatedly accused the United States of undermining his socialist revolution. A failed coup attempt in 2002, tacitly supported by the Bush administration, further antagonized the Venezuelan leader and his supporters. This antagonism is unlikely to change soon. At a meeting convened the day Mr. Chavez died, Vice President Nicolas Maduro accused Washington of plotting to undermine Venezuela and announced the expulsion of 2 American diplomats. That does not bode well for future relations, says Carl Meacham of the Center for Strategic and International Studies.
It is sort of sticking to the playbook that Chavismo has used in the past to always blame the United States or blame some foreign entity to distract them from the problems that they have going on in Venezuela.
Despite this, Venezuela is a major supplier of petroleum to the United States and even provides free heating oil to poor Americans through a nonprofit group. American University professor Philip Brenner says this shows that relations between the two countries would be better if Washington recognizes certain realities.
I think the important thing to remember about Venezuela is that they have never even threatened to cut off our oil. Venezuela has done nothing to actually harm U.S. interests except to challenge U.S. dominance.
Vice President Maduro, a former foreign minister and union leader, is expected to govern Venezuela for now and could be more pragmatic in his dealings with Washington, according to Michael Shifter.
I think what we can expect from Maduro is a very tough stand, ideological stand, confrontational stand publicly. But behind the scenes, I would imagine that he was going to try to try to work things out, try to see, at least establish channels of communication with the including with the United States.
Meanwhile, Maduro's accusations have been rejected by U.S. officials, who have limited their comments to possible areas of cooperation, such as counter-narcotics and energy, in the post-Chavez era. Bill Rogers, VOA News.
You've been to Venezuela. You represented the United States at President Chavez's funeral. Why were you chosen to represent America?
Well, I have a long history in Venezuela and in Latin America. Started way back when I first got elected into Congress, and there was a young man that was elected president of Venezuela by the name of Hugo Chavez. And so I wanted to go down to Venezuela to see who is this man and get to meet him and what he was about. So back then, me and Democrats and Republicans, quite frankly, Bill Delahunt from Massachusetts, former member of Congress, and Cass Ballinger, a Republican from North Carolina, we went down to Venezuela and we met him. And what we found was that he was a guy that was interested in making a difference for poor people. And so we developed a relationship. And as a result of that relationship, we formed a group called Grupo de Boston, which was comprised of both Chavistas and opposition, trying to get them to work together in their National Assembly. And relationships built as a result of that. Unfortunately, there was many windows of opportunity that I think that Venezuela and the United States had to get things together, and they didn't, and we missed those windows. And so I believe that the President of the United States, and I'm thankful for him for giving me the opportunity to represent the country there, sees another window of opportunity. Because of the relationship that I've had with the Venezuelans, with the Colombians, with the Peruvians, with the Argentinians, with the Chileans, that here I had an opportunity now to go down, show the respect for President Chavez, at least, you know, controversial figure, absolutely, but nobody can question the fact that he wanted to help the poor, and try to move forward to see if, in fact, we can send a message that we want a better relationship with Venezuela, and I think that's why I was chosen to go.
You met the man so many times, and you know him, better than a lot of people here knew him. But what was the reason why these two countries couldn't get along? Why he was so rabidly against the United States?
There was a series of circumstances that I think that led to the separation. Oftentimes, some people forget that, at that time, the administration did not want to get real close to him because he was not the kind of guy that usually win those kinds of elections. And there was a coup d'etat in Venezuela back in 2002. Unfortunately, our government at that time acknowledged the coup government within the 40 minutes of the coup. But the people of Venezuela came back and said, we want our president back, and that turned, and I think that he never forgot that. So there was other circumstances, back and forth, both sides guilty, I think, that caused the split in the relationship over the last few years. But there's no question, as I stated earlier, that the people of Venezuela elected their president, elected him 3 times. In the recall election, they elected him, re-elected him. I had the opportunity to go down to watch and observe a number of those elections. I saw them to be free and fair, basically, and people lining up, waiting hours upon hours just to vote. So the voices of the people of Venezuela was heard, as I hope they will be heard again coming up April 15th when they have their new elections. And I hope that we are able to sit down and talk and work some things out, because it's important to the United States, it's important to Venezuela.
Congressman, you rose from humble background in East Harlem, New York, became a successful lawyer and a judge and a state legislator, and then finally a congressman. I'm sure you must have had lots of difficulties, challenges. Can you share some of those events in your life which actually helped you push to this position?
First thing I'll say, I had great parents. We were poor, but I never knew it, to be quite honest with you. We lived in public housing and didn't have much, but I had great parents who told me that I could do anything that I wanted to do as long as I got an education. I can recall as a little, my father, had 2 jobs. He drove taxi at night and worked in the Broadway theater during the day. And he would carry me with him so I could watch what he was doing. He says, look, see me cleaning these floors. Now, you could not go to school, but you're going to have to clean these floors also. Or you can get an education and you can get a better job and make some more money. So the first thing that I would say, I had great role models. I had my mother, who was always involved in community. Even in, she would be part of the tenant association, trying to make sure that her floor and the projects were the cleanest floor and that people within, or tenants within the building were doing the right things and protected. So I had those two role models that were significant for me in my life. Now, given that, there were obstacles that you had to overcome. Some, even in the public school system. I can recall my ambition had always been to grow up and to go to law school and to become a lawyer. And I can remember once, I must have been in 7th grade or something of that nature, a guidance counselor told me I should lower my ambitions. And I think they did that because of the color of my skin, to be quite honest with you. I went home and I told my mother what that guidance counselor told me, and she was in the school the next day to tell that guidance counselor, don't you ever tell my son what he can or cannot do. And one of the biggest delights of my life was when I went back to see that guidance counselor after I got my law degree and was a lawyer, because he was still there to let him know and see my degree that I could accomplish what I wanted to set out to do.
You had great parents to guide you, and now you have a great family to raise. Any challenges with the family? I mean, it's a tough job here in this country to raise children and to raise them well. What are your challenges?
Well, the challenge is particularly this job, because you're away from home a lot. It's not a normal life, this job, because 3 to 4 days of the week, I'm not there. And your family thereby picks up and have to do all the things that, especially my wife with my daughters, that I ordinarily would interact for those 3 or 4 days. And then you try to make up for some of it when you get home, but you have a district that you have to represent. And so you have to run around and see the folks in those districts. But at the same time, you've got to make sure. So one of the things that I try to make sure that if I make a promise to my family, I keep it. So I try not to miss anything that's special in their lives. If in fact my daughters are having something special in school, or they're doing something that they really want me at, and I say I'm going to be there, I make sure that I'm there. And I try to plan around that. I try to make sure that we get quality time together, that we try to take a vacation or something that, when we gather. And when I am home, that we have dinner together, so that we can sit around and talk around the dinner table about things that are going on in their lives, and I tell them about things that are going on in my life. And we share those kind of conversations. So it is, the job makes it difficult. They sacrifice, because sometimes in this business, as I said earlier, everybody doesn't like you. And so sometimes somebody will say something that don't like you. They say, hey, don't talk about my dad. So you have that. And then other times, people talk good things about you. And so then they'll, say, Dad, don't get a big head because they said something about you, keeping you down, keeping you real. And then my wife, she lets me know when I come home, take out the garbage. She says, you may be a big shot in Washington, but here, you got to take out the garbage. And so she keeps it real. And that's what makes it work.
I can relate to that. Congressman, you have done so well for yourself, and being from a minority, and also from that background. Do you think today's America, really has it for the minority, has done well for the minorities and the poor? Does this country have now, after having elected a black president, what it takes to be successful for a minority person in this country?
Listen, I believe that the United States of America is the greatest country in the world. Greatest country in the world. But I also understand and recognize it didn't happen overnight. That there was many lives that were lost. Many people were deprived. Many individuals suffered so that we could have a Barack Obama to be president of the United States of America. I also understand that because he's the president of the United States of America, it shows that a country can grow grow and prosper for the better. But it doesn't mean that all the problems are over. There's still huge racial problems in the United States of America. There's certain news channels that I go on today. If I went on this show today, my office will receive all kind of hate mail, all kind of hate phone calls in the United States in 2013. there are a lot of individuals who are still discriminated against because of the color of their skin in the United States of America. So we still, and I still have to fight for those rights. Still have to fight to try to make sure that there's justice. Those days are not over simply because Barack Obama is the president of the United States. But if you ask me, are times much better for me than they were for my father? Oh my, it's like night and day. I can recall, and I'm old enough to recall, visiting my parents or my grandparents in South Carolina. And when I was a little boy, when I would go down and you'd have to sit in the front of the train because that's where the coal and was the worst, where it was the coal engines, and that's where the worst part of the train ride was. And then when I got off the train, I remember today, the color, the water fountain saying colored and white. I remember individuals not allowing my father to go certain places and still calling an uncle of mine boy, even though he was 60-some odd years old. So I've seen the country change substantially. But I also know that it's not the utopia, that there are no problems in the country. And so what we always have to do is to remember, and what I like about the country and what we're still doing is striving for a more perfect union. And as long as we're moving in the right direction, to me, that's what's the key. As long as we're progressing and moving in the right direction, well, then those individuals who had dreams, you know, we talk about me, my ancestors, they were slaves in this country, but they had hopes and they had dreams. And I have to admit that some of their hopes and dreams, when they look at President Obama and they look at a Gregory Meeks, who, you know, I was the 99th African American in the history of this country to get elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Those were the hopes and dreams of the individuals that were slaves. And for me to be able to do that, it means their dreams have become a reality. And it means that this country is moving forward in the right direction. We've got more, you know, we've got to accomplish, but we're definitely going right. And to me, it's an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure to represent this country.
That was our show this week. We are going to come back next week with a new interview. Please send your feedback and comments to cd@voanews.com. This is your host, Faiz Rahman. Thank you for watching.